So we're talking about the fundamental theorem of algebra, and now we're going to talk about find the conjugate pairs of complex zeros. And the complex conjugate theorem is very similar to the irrational conjugate theorem, just using complex numbers as opposed to irrational numbers. So if f is a polynomial function with real coefficients and a plus bi is an imaginary zero of f, then a minus bi is also a zero of f. So we have some directions. Write the polynomial of least degree that has rational coefficients, a leading coefficient of 1, and the given zeros. So here are two zeros. We have 3 and we have 3 plus I. Now, because of the complex conjugate theorem, we know that there's going to be one more zero. And so in this one, we know that there's going to be 3 plus I, and because there's 3 plus I, that also means that we have to have the conjugate pair, which is 3 minus I. So when we write this out, these are zeros. So when we're writing out our zeros, we're going to say that it's going to be, we use the subtraction sign. So x minus 3 times x minus, now we got to subtract that whole thing, 3 plus I times x minus 3 minus I. Okay, so 3 plus I goes here, 3 minus I goes here, and then we can start to multiply and then simplify this. So I want to start over here, and I want to distribute the negative sign into both of these binomials. So I can distribute the negative in here, and I can distribute the negative in here. I want to keep our binomial up front, and so we get x negative times 3 is negative 3, and negative times I is negative I. And then our next one, we're going to write down the x, and then we say negative times 3 is negative 3, and negative times negative I is positive or plus I. And so now we have two trinomials and a binomial. And now I want to take this trinomial and multiply it by this trinomial because a lot of our terms are going to drop out. So the first thing, we want to make sure we don't forget about this x minus 3 out front. So we're going to multiply the x first, and we get x times x is x squared. X times negative 3 is negative 3x, and x times I is positive xi. Then we're going to take the negative 3 and multiply it by the three terms. So then we get negative 3x. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. And negative 3 times I is negative 3i. And then last, we are going to multiply by the negative I. So then we get negative I times x is negative xi. Negative I times negative 3 is positive 3i. And negative I times I is negative I squared. And we remember that I squared is equal to negative 1. So we have a lot of things that we can actually cancel out. And, well, let's start simplifying our polynomial over here. So we have our x minus 3. That's going to stay out front. We only have one x squared term, so we can write down x squared. Then next thing we come to is our linear term. So we did our x squared. Then we have a negative 3x and a negative 3x, and no more. So negative 3 and negative 3 becomes negative 6x. And the next thing that we come to is we come to a positive xi. If we have any other xi terms, we have a negative xi term here. So this negative xi cancels out our positive xi, so we don't have to do anything with that. The next thing that we come to is we come to a positive 9. We don't have that, so I'm going to write down the plus 9. Then we come to a negative 3i. We have a positive 3i, so our negative 3i and our positive 3i, those cancel each other out. And then the negative I squared becomes negative 1, which becomes plus 1. And so we can combine like terms one last time here, and we get x minus 3, x squared minus 6x plus 10. And the last thing to do is we just have to, yes, not the last thing we have to do. We have to take the x and multiply it by the trinomial. Then we have to take the negative 3 and multiply it by the trinomial. So x times x squared is x cubed. X times negative 6x is negative 6x squared. X times 10 is positive 10x. And then we can work with the negative 3. Negative 3 times x squared is negative 3x squared. Negative 3 times negative 6x is positive 18x, and negative 3 times 10 is negative 30. And then the last thing we have to do is combine like terms. We have x cubed, so we'll leave that one alone. The next thing we come to is our squared term. So we have a negative 6x squared and a negative 3x squared. And we add those together and we get negative 9x squared. Then we have our linear terms, which are 10x and 18x, which become 28x. And last, we bring down our constant, which is negative 30. So this is the polynomial. And we know that the polynomial is degree 3 with lead coefficient 1. So the least degree that has rational coefficients and a leading coefficient of 1. Leading coefficient of 1, least degree is 3 because we have 1, 2, 3, 0. So that is the polynomial that represents those zeros.